So last week we started into a series. 2 weeks. Just wanted to look at the spiritual discipline of simplicity, and just on and off over the last year or 2 years now, and probably for another 2 or 3 years. We're just going to take what we call spiritual disciplines and look at them and talk about them, and just ask ourselves how we can apply these things into our lives. And so we talked about scripture memory and meditation already. We talked about fasting already. We talked about some other things. And as you can tell, I haven't applied fasting in my life yet. One day I will again. But we're just looking at these disciplines because these disciplines can help us in so many ways. They can help make things clearer for us. They can help us in our relationship to God to feel stronger connection with God. They can help us in our decisions. They can help us in our reactions and how we deal with things and different things. But I want to go to this verse. Now this verse is in Exodus, and this verse is very familiar to many of you. You know this is part of the 10 Commandments, okay? Exodus chapter 20, verse 3. It says, "You shall have no other God before me." Now here's the thing, when we talk about spiritual disciplines, especially when we talk about the spiritual discipline of simplicity, in a lot of ways, it helps us with this commandment. And if the following commandments after that, if you know the whole passage, just let me read verses 4 and 5 to you, okay? I'll start with verse 3. "Have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself an idol in the form of anything in heaven above or earth beneath it or in the waters below. You shall not bow down to them or worship them. For I, the Lord your God, a jealous God, punishing the children for the sin of the fathers to the third and fourth generation who hate me." So, we look at this and we consider this. Have no other gods before me. And we talk about the discipline of simplicity. And the discipline of simplicity is about getting rid of the clutter in our lives, whether it's inside or outside, that distract us from God. And oftentimes the possessions we have, the skills we have, the resources we have, all those type of things are things that can get in the way of our relationship with God. They can become little mini gods that start to become before God. Okay? And it's a hard thing, and it's a thing to deal with it all the time. Maybe that thing is family. Maybe that thing is actually a possession. Or maybe that thing is money. Maybe that thing is time. Maybe that thing is other things. So we're asking ourselves to consider these things and put them into proper perspective. Okay? In one of the blogs I read actually last week, and when I was kind of doing some search, says today we need to hear again that God alone is worthy of worship and obedience, and that idolatry of affluence is rampant. Saying, hey, we try to set ourselves up to look so good. We wear the right clothes. We wear the right things, all in an effort to impress people around us. And that becomes an idol to us. Okay? When I was growing up and we learned about these verses in churches, always pictured us when it said, have no idols, actually having what we can see around here in Taiwan all the time, an actual idol. But I never thought about it in that sense because of how young I was and wasn't able to think more abstractly about idols can be other things in my life as well too. Okay? Possessions I own, things I have. What is it that I value more than God? There was a period in my life where I had a group of friends that my friends liked watching football, American football together. American football games happen on Sunday. So they wanted to watch the games on Sunday. And this was way back when, you remember when TVs used to be really huge and big, deep, boxes and everything else? Well, I had one friend that loved American football so much that you didn't have internet, you couldn't stream it, you couldn't watch it later, you either watched it live or you taped it on a VHS. You remember VHS tapes? Okay. And he wanted to watch the games live because if you're watching one game, they always tell you to score the other games. So if you weren't watching them live, it wasn't the same. So he was so into it and his dad was into it too, that in their house They had a big, what was called a console TV, so it was like a big cabinet built in. And they would bring in the other TV that they had in the house on Sundays and set it on top of that, so you had one game on top and one game on bottom, that you could watch both games at the same time. And they loved it, and I loved it too. But then there came a choice. If the game starts at 11 o'clock in the morning, church is at 11 to 12:30, do I skip church or do I go watch the football game? Which do I do? Now, because I was afraid of my mom, I went to church. Hey, I have to admit that, okay? There was a lot of times I wanted to go watch the football game, but I knew even my mom wasn't there, even my mom was somewhere else, or visiting my grandparents or something else. If I didn't go to church, my mom would know about it, and she would tell me about it. Hi, Mom. Okay? And she would. It was a good thing. But there was also later in my life where it became my decision. Because even though I love football, my relationship with God was more important. And at that time, part of my relationship with God, a big part of it was that I needed to be in church because I needed to worship with other people. I needed to hear God's word, and I needed to be challenged with what was going on. I didn't think about it that way, but that was important. That could have become an idol in my life. But thankfully, God didn't let it be. But I can go through and I can talk about other things in my life that have become idols, where I've realized at some point, and I said, I can't put this before God. So we talk about the discipline of simplicity. One of the important things to think about is what is there, as I said before, that's hindering your relationship with God. Because that may be something you need to consider. How can you simplify that in your life? Now, some of you were like, well, my job is that way, but I just can't quit my job. Well, that's true. Okay? But maybe you can think about some other things related to that and some things how you can do things a little bit differently. Okay? Foster says this. It says, at the heart of the covenant is the inner lust to have. So when we talk about idolatry, when we talk about wanting things, and we talk about the other commandments, it says we want to have. It says there's nothing wrong with having things, okay? But it's the undisciplined craving that is condemned. God doesn't say you can't have nice clothes. God doesn't say you can't have nice things. God doesn't say you can't have this job or money or these type of things. But what God does say is, are they controlling you or are you in control of them? And that's what the discipline of simplicity is about, is not letting things control us. And those things, like I said, they could be physical things, they can be relationships, they could be other things as well too. Okay? So, are we keeping God at the forefront of our lives? Okay, this discipline of simplicity sets us on a path of achieving, viewing our possessions, times, and resource in a proper perspective. Okay, that's where we are. Okay, that's where we've kind of gone through so far. It's kind of what we talked about a little bit. Okay, it says this is what we ended with last week. It says discipline of simplicity is not easy. You have to balance the inner reality. In other words, your focus, your relationship with God, with outward expressions. So here's the problem. Sometimes people take and say, well, in order to be a good Christian, you need to look like this. Okay? I've had people in my life that have said you have to dress differently in order to be a good Christian. Okay? And their heart was true to intent. They weren't, trying to do something bad, but that's the way they thought. Sometimes we take that to extremes, I have known people that won't wear the latest fashions because they think, well, that's, and we're not setting ourselves apart if we wear the latest fashions. And so their clothing is always something that maybe 10 to 20 years ago was fashionable, but it's not fashionable anymore. And I always question that. I was like, well, how does that work? Because at one point it was fashion. So are you seeking fashion? You're just a little bit slow? No, I don't say that to people. But I have that type of thinking, okay? So it's not what's on the outside, but it's what's on the inside. But what's on the inside reflects outwardly. And so what we do on the outside shows what's in our hearts. Now here's the other thing about it. It's one of those kind of two-way streets. Sometimes we have the idea, I want to value God more in my life, but I know this thing is really competing with God in my life. And so we say, I'm going to work on the inner side first and not worry about this. Sometimes you need to take that step of faith. You need to say, hey, God, look, I'm not sure I'm ready to get rid of this yet, but I'm going to take that step, and I'm going to try to put it in its proper perspective. And then you start doing the things you need to do. And that's some of what we're going to talk about today. What are some things we can do to start on the process of the outward that will support what we want to do on the inward and make our inward grow stronger? Does that make sense? Okay? So, let's take me, for example. It's not a very good example because it hasn't worked so far. Okay? For a long time, have been worried about my weight. And I know some of you have been worried about my weight because some of you actually tell Nancy. You don't tell me, but you tell Nancy. Okay? And then Nancy tells me. And I'm so grateful that you care for me that much. That's the way I take it. You can come tell me personally. I won't take it badly, okay? My mom doesn't have any problem with telling me personally, okay? But I'm a little bit concerned about it too. So I have been making an effort. Nancy could attest to this. I've been making an effort for about 3 months now to exercise more, to get some cardio in every day, to do more walking, to eating better, to doing things. Nothing's happened very much yet. Okay, I've lost 6 kilograms in the last 3 months, but you can't tell it. I know, because I got about 60 more to go. Okay, but here's the point. Inside, I want to change. I know there's a point that I need to start. I know that the more I exercise, the more I want to exercise. I know the more that I eat more healthier, the more I want to eat more healthier. Because of what I do on the outside will influence what's on the inside. And that's the same thing here when we talk about these spiritual disciplines. Simplicity is a discipline because we have to work at it and practice it in order to apply it to our lives. It's one of those other things. You got to do the work. Okay? And as I mentioned last week, I think I used the same illustration. I can read all the blogs, I can read all the magazines, I can read everything, books about health and getting healthy, but unless I do it, it's not going to help anything. Okay? Same type of idea. Look at Proverbs chapter 6, verses 6 through 8. It says, "Go to the ant, you sluggard. Consider the ways and be wise." So God is saying, hey, look at the ant and see what kind of wisdom we can get from the ant. It has no commander, it has no overseer, no ruler, yet it stores provisions in the summer and gathers food at harvest. And God says, be wise about all this. You got to go do the work as well. Okay? Now, we can apply this in several different ways when we talk about what we talk about today. When we talk about today, we're not talking about going and giving away everything and being, making insane decisions with our resources, with our wealth, and with everything else. But what we're talking about is God saying, be wise with what you have. Okay? It is wisdom to save money if you can save money. It is wisdom not to buy something that's very expensive if it's out of your budget. It is wisdom to consider things in their proper perspective. It is a good thing for us to do. So, when we describe simplicity, not only is it inner reality, is to say something false. The inner reality is not a reality until there's an outward expression. That's what Richard Foster says. And some of you know this. Some of you have met people that talk the talk, but they don't walk the walk. That's what we like to say. Okay, they talk the talk, but they don't walk the walk. You need to walk the walk with this discipline as well too. So here are some things. All right. First thing, buy things for their usefulness rather than for their status. Now, I got another kind of illustration. I don't know if it's a very good illustration or not, but I thought about that actually this morning and as well, and I've thought about it other times. But some of you notice I got a black wedding ring on. Some of you notice that some days my wedding ring is blue. Sometimes it's white. Sometimes it's green. Sometimes it's copper color. Okay? And throughout the last couple of years, I've had questions about it. People say, "Well, what's with your ring? You know what? It's silicone. It's not metal, anything else. It's silicone." And what happened was simply this: Nancy and I had wedding rings, a set of wedding rings that you put the wedding rings together. There's some really, really tiny little diamonds in them, but they make a cross. You know, you put the two on top of each other. It was cool. Now, those wedding rings we bought, of course, before we got married. And, we spent a lot of money on them. Well, about 2 years ago, one day we were actually eating supper at a restaurant with Nancy's parents. And I don't know if I noticed it first or Nancy noticed it, but my wedding ring was gone. It had fallen off my finger sometime during that day. Don't know where or what. I'd washed the car that day. I'd been out walking that day. I'd done some other things that day. It was simply gone. And so started talking about replacing it. But at the same time, I usually like to watch a U.S. baseball game about once a week. And I used to like to watch the whole game, but now I just kind of watch innings here and there and don't really watch the whole game. But I noticed about that time that a lot of the athletes and a lot of this and former athletes and announcers were wearing wedding rings that were silicone wedding rings. So I kind of did some research on it, and it was kind of a fad in the U.S. two years ago about kind of more this idea of simple living like we talked about last week and not using resources and everything else. Well, I kind of got interested in it, and then I got really interested in it when I found out that I could get a package of 5 wedding rings for $20 US. 600 NT. The wedding rings we had before were 70,000 NT. T1. So you think about buy things for their usefulness rather than their status. This is useful because the wedding ring is there to do what? To remind me of my love, my commitment to Nancy, to God in our marriage. Does it matter if it's metal and it's pretty and fancy? No. I have known people that have taken just twine, rope, hemp, and twisted it to make wedding rings, and that's their wedding rings. They don't have to have status. They don't have to have things. I know of one person that had a tattoo. That was their wedding ring. Okay? So you consider it. You consider, why are you buying something? Do I need a wedding ring? Well, in this culture, no, I guess I don't. But I grow up with the idea that if you're married, you have a wedding ring, and I want one, and it's okay to want one. Do I need to spend lots of money on it? No. I'm happy with this because it reminds me, again, of my love and my commitment. So you buy things according to their usefulness, not their status. I Googled this idea and this concept. I was like, what does the world say about this? And I found one interesting article and one interesting blog. The writer of the blog, he wrote, he said, why buy a watch? A watch. So why do you need to buy a watch? And my first thought was to tell time. And his point was, he said, nowadays everybody carries a cell phone. He says it takes what? A second, maybe up to 3 seconds to pull your phone out and to look and see what time it is. He says, so does a watch help you that much? And then he talked about, like I have, the fitness band type of watches. And how many people have those fitness band watches, but they never use them as well too. So this is what we're talking about when we talk about their usefulness. Is this something you're really going to use? Is it something you really need? And I have been, this is something that comes in my mind all the time. And there have been times where I'll be shopping. I go to Costco about every couple of weeks to get milk, and sometimes every week because the boys are getting older. We're going through more milk. And I'll walk through Costco and I'll look at something. Ooh, that's pretty cool. I think I'd like to get that. And then I ask myself, is that something I really, really need? And you know what the answer is most of the time? No, I don't. Okay? Doesn't mean I never buy those things, because sometimes you just need to, you don't need to, but sometimes it's just nice. But we ask ourselves that question. All right, second thing is, consider the impact. What is the long-term impact of what you're going to buy? Again, this is a decision I made, and I kind of wrestle with this decision, whether it was a good decision or it was a bad decision. But about 2 years before Nancy and I got married, I went back to the U.S., and when I went back to the U.S., I took a sum of cash with me that I was going to actually buy some stock with. And there were two companies I've been researching, been looking at, and I was going to buy stock in those two companies. But when I got back to the U.S., my brother had a motorcycle that he was wanting to sell. And he wanted to sell it, and he and I had this idea about that we would take some motorcycle trips when I went back together, and we did. And I had looked into renting a motorcycle, and if I bought my brother's motorcycle from him, I could have a motorcycle, and I didn't have to rent a motorcycle, and if I just took 3 trips, it would pay for itself. And I justified all these things in my mind. So I took a majority of that money that I was going to buy stock with and bought my brother's motorcycle from him. Now, he was able to use that to buy a bigger and better motorcycle, okay? I enjoyed it. I took trips on it. I had one trip that I took actually by myself. I drove about, I think it was 2,500 miles. I drove across the U.S., basically middle of the U.S., back and forth over a few weeks' time, visited friends and things like that. He and I took a couple of trips together, enjoyed that time together, and it was an investment that was worth it. But since then, I have wondered, because I've gone back and looked at those stocks and said, if I had taken that money and bought the stocks, I would have 5 times the amount of money now that I did then. Okay? Now, I'm not telling you I regret that decision. I actually think I'm glad I bought the motorcycle. But consider the long-range impact. Okay? Some of the blogs and things I read said, hey, do you need the latest furniture in your house right now? Or do you need to save that money so that when you're 70 years old, you have furniture in your house? Okay? We consider the long-range impact. Be aware and access. Be aware of the things that you have already. Okay? In the world of Costco, because of Costco, we use that because of the wholesale stuff. Do you really need 500 of these one item? Or can you just go to a local store and get one item and that be sufficient? Okay? What do you have? What is it you have at home? What can you use already? Consider those type of things. Also, a lot of when we talk about being aware, is talking about considering the impact, is where do they come from? Okay? What's it costing the people to produce it where you are? Quinoa is a food staple that many of us have started using in the last few years and became really popular. Did you know where it comes from? That it was actually a basic staple that was really cheap, but because it became popular throughout the world, the local people no longer can afford it. And it's in its areas in Africa and other places that they need food. Well, what's the impact? Do you really need that, or can you just use rice, which is available everywhere here? You think about things like that. You consider things like that. Look at Matthew 6:19. It says, "Do not store up for yourself treasures on earth where moth and rust destroy and where thieves break in and steal." So when we consider the impact, when we think about these things, we think about what are we doing? Are we storing treasures up for ourselves, or are we using these resources in a better way? In a way that is productive for ourselves, is productive for people around us, that's productive for the kingdom of God. Okay? All right. Give things away. Now this one's kind of hard, but it's also kind of easy. And here's how it helps. In our house, well, not in our house anymore, but when our boys were born, we bought a car seat, because we had a car, we bought a car seat. But we didn't really like that car seat. And so we actually sold that car seat and we bought another one. And the car seat we bought, the second one, was a car seat that they could use from the time they were a baby till the time they were about 7 or 8 years old. Okay? It was also a car seat that was a little bit narrower, so it was easier to put in a car and take out of a car. It also would work on an airplane, was proved for airplanes. And since we were, at that time, before all this, we were about once a year flying back to the U.S., we could take it on the airplane, different stuff. Great car seats. But about a year and a half ago or so, we switched out of those car seats into what's called a booster seats. There's another. When I was a kid, you sit on phone books. And you remember big fat phone books. So you sit on that, and then you sit on that on the car. But that's what the boys had. So we had these 2 car seats. Had nice bags for them, put them in the bags. They were sitting in our house, in our living room. And then I would move them over here, and then I would move them over here, and then I'd move them back to another room, then I'd move them back out there. And they were constantly kind of in the way. And we talked about selling them, we talked about giving them away and things like that. But they were just kind of a nuisance. They were just taking up space. They were taking up room. They were, weren't taking much energy, but every once in a while they were taking energy and time. So finally, during this, it was in May, it was beginning of May, one of Nancy's friends was going to have twins, right? And they had one child already, they had a car, they were looking for car seats. Nancy told them about it and told them how they were narrow. They liked that idea because then they could put the car seats in a room. There's still enough room for the third child already that they had to sit in between them. All this kind of good stuff. Of course, they were free. That was, a benefit. They were in good shape, good condition, everything else. And so they said they wanted them. But then the lockdown happened. They didn't come get them. So we, our excitement about getting rid of them waned. And then after a couple months, about in July, sometime toward the end of July, he came and got them. And he came and got them, and we sat there and kind of showed him how to put them in the car seats themselves too. We had cleaned them up a little bit and made sure all the parts were there and all this and that. Gave them to him, and he left. And I walked back into the house, and I was amazed. Just getting rid of those 1-2 little items just made our living room seem bigger. Is that right, Nancy? It just made a little bit of a difference. So when you give things away, sometimes it simplifies things because it removes clutter. It allows you to see other stuff. Now, if you ever come to our house, especially right now, you realize that we've got a lot of stuff to go through and possibly give away. And we keep talking about it, but we need to start doing it. So you need to give things away. One of the things I read said, look, if you have something, ask yourself the question, is this so important that I could not get rid of it? And they said that most of the things, actually one blog I read said that most people's houses, over 50% of the things they have, they could get rid of and they never would miss it. I got a relative that I don't know if he still does this, but he used to do this. In his closet where he kept his clothes, if he had a shirt, even if he really liked the shirt and he hasn't worn it for a year, he'd give it away. Because he said, I haven't worn it for a year, it's not that important to me, I don't need it, give it away. You think about things like that, how to reduce, how to recycle if you want to recycle, how to give things away. What can you do? There's lots of things we can do. Hebrews 13:16 says this, do not forget to do good and to share with others, to give things away. For with such sacrifices, God is pleased. Okay? And God says, hey, I'm pleased when you share what you have, because ultimately what we have belongs to who? Belongs to God. Okay? And he's saying, hey, you're sharing the resources I shared with you. Well done, good and faithful servant. I am pleased with you. Enjoy things without owning them. Now, I've never thought about this before I started looking into all this, but this is basically talking about, hey, Especially if you are a person of means, if you're a wealthy person, okay? If you like going to the beach, you can go to the beach and enjoy the beach without owning the beach. You don't have to buy that section of the beach so that nobody else can be there. And, share it, enjoy it, be there. Learn to go out on hikes. Learn to do simple things that don't cost a lot of money. You don't have to travel all the way around the world to do something, okay? You can find local things to do, things that you can do, day trips and stuff like that. And when I was a teenager, we lived in the state of Wyoming in the U.S., and the state of Wyoming has Yellowstone, and Mount Rushmore is not too far away in South Dakota, and Devil's Tower, and a place called Hell's Half Acre, and other Wind River Range, and all other, Thermopolis is a place with hot springs and stuff like that. There's all these things that you could do. Well, my parents a lot would get up on Saturday morning, get in the car, and they would drive to go see these things. And that was something that was simple to do. Yes, you had to pay for gas. Yes, you buy some meals and things like that. But it was a simple, easy trip, but still allowed them to enjoy things around them. Okay? Nancy and I were talking last night because we were talking about taking the kids to a movie, because it's been a long time since we tried to take the kids to a movie. And before, they have not liked going to the movies. And we would say, well, but maybe this time they will like it. And then we kind of both had a thought kind of at the same time. It's like, but if we go to a movie and we buy movie tickets, you got to get snacks, because you always got to get popcorn at the movies. And then probably, we go out to eat either before or afterwards as well, too. And you put all those things together, and if the kids don't really like going to movies, why get them to like going to movies? Because at home we can rent a movie, and we can order pizza and bring it in, and they can eat pizza and watch the movie and be happy for a whole lot less. It's a whole lot simpler. So we enjoy things without having to own them. We enjoy things without having to spend lots of money on them, or lots of our resources, or even lots of our time on them as well, okay? We develop a deeper appreciation for God's creation and provision when we enjoy things without owning them. Look at this verse. Psalms 24:1 says, "The earth is the Lord's, and everything is in it in the world, all who live in it." And I know we have one person here that I know likes to go hiking a lot, okay? And some of you turned and looked at her already. I didn't mean to point her out, but when, I don't know about her, but when I go hiking, some of the things I like to do is sometimes you're hiking, and even when you're hiking on trails here in the city, you get to certain points and you kind of look out, and it's kind of like, it's beautiful. It's nice. Maybe it's at night and it's all the city lights, okay? And you start thinking about God created. God gave us intelligence. God gave us wisdom to be able to know how electrons work, so we could produce electricity, so we could produce lights, so we could produce these beautiful things. You look at the mountains, you look at people, you look at animals, plants, all those type of things, and you start to appreciate really a lot more about who God is. And what happens is, as you do that, inwardly, your relationship with God builds strength. And then outwardly, these other things start to mean a whole lot less. And you're able to control them more. This one, let your speech be plain and honest. And I think you probably know the verse I'm going to use already. Simply let your yes be yes, and your no be no. Anything beyond this comes from the evil one. Okay? You want to talk about simplifying life? This will simplify life for most of us in many, many, many ways. If politicians would do this, it would simplify life. There would be no news. Okay, because life would be so simple. Simplify things. Let your yes be yes, your no be no. Have integrity in your speech and your actions and things that you're doing. Reject anything that breeds the oppression of others. And this kind of relates to what I said before when we kind of analyze things. Okay, but consider things. Now, this has been in the news lately, but there's been protests against shoe companies and other companies because people have gone to the places where their factories are and say, oh, these people are oppressed. Now, I'm not telling you to buy into all that, but I'm saying consider it. But one thing you need to do too is consider both sides of the story, okay? And what I mean by that is is my time in being some places, especially here in Southeast Asia, that I know of places where there are people who are working that are sewing garments together, and they sew garments together actually in their own homes with their own sewing machines. They go to a place, there's a meeting place, they go to that place, somebody gives them a pile of materials, cloth, sometimes it's pre-cut, sometimes it's not pre-cut, and they'll say, sew these, here's the pattern we want, sew these together, bring them back, and we'll give you X amount per shirt, or per item of clothing. I said shirt, but per item of clothing. Now, in the Western world, in the U.S. world, we may look at that and say, well, that person only earned $3 a day for working all day long and creating all these clothes, $3 US. And we may say, that's abuse of that person. But that person in that little village that has nothing, that knows if they earn $1 a day, they can feed their families, it means a lot. I'm not saying anything other than consider both sides of the story, but we reject anything that breeds oppression of others. Isaiah says this: learn to do right, seek justice, encourage the oppressed. Okay? Encourage the oppressed. Defend the cause of the fatherless, plead the case of the widow. Consider your choices, consider the things you have, how they affect other people in your life. The next thing, shun anything that distracts you from seeking first the kingdom of God. Matthew says this, Jesus, we talked about this verse before. If you want to be perfect, go sell all your possessions and give to the poor, and you will have a treasure in heaven. Then come follow me. And Jesus said this to the rich young ruler because he knew that his possessions, his money, his wealth, all stood between him and his relationship with God. He's not saying you should do the same thing. But what he's saying is you should consider the things in your life. Do you need to get rid of those things to simplify your life so that they're not getting in the way of your relationship with Jesus? Okay? Now, last couple things here. Well, actually, this is the last thing. And I like how Richard Foster ended one of the... He's got a book that has a chapter about the discipline of simplicity, and then he wrote a whole book on the discipline of simplicity. But he says this, he says, may God give you and me the courage, the wisdom, the strength, always to hold the kingdom of God as the number one priority in our lives. To do so is to live simplicity. The discipline of simplicity is all about that. Is God number one? Or do we have other gods that we worship? Do we have other gods we put before Him? Do we have idols? Are we practicing idolatry in our life because of how much we value things, or our time, or our relationships? And so the discipline of simplicity comes down to evaluating everything and saying, is this something I should keep? Is this something I should get rid of? And how can it help me in my relationship with Christ? And as he said, may God give you the courage, the wisdom, the strength to do as you should do. Let's pray together. As we pray,